You say India, what a wonderful country, nearly 20 years, with an average GDP growth rate of 6.25, rise rapidly, successively surpassed South Korea and Canada, Italy, France, United Kingdom, became the 5th largest economy in the world. Morgan Stanley forecast, it will be within 5 years, rapidly surpassing Germany and Japan, become the 3rd largest economy in the world. India's 2 richest men, it is also the richest man in Asia in turn. Tech unicorns are also jumping out one by one. Apple also just said, to produce 25% of the iPhone, transferred to India. Listen to India, is it going to rise all the way? Can be at the same time. It also has 10% of its population living in extreme poverty. Many people still insist on going to the toilet in the open. Largest laundromat in Mumbai, still insisting on hand washing by thousands of people. India is also corrupt. What do you say? What is the situation in this India? Is the economy good or bad? In fact, since early 2000 year, people have been saying that India's economy is going to rise. It's been more than 20 years, it's still going on, about to rise, and a mess with this superposition state. Let's stop talking nonsense. Hurry up and take a look at this wonderful country India. In fact, before the 18th century, India's economy is still booming. Let me show you an interesting statistic. This is the IMF's assessment of the major economies in history, a rough estimate of the total global economy. Of course, historical data cannot be very accurate. Let's take a look. Look, the United States began to rise in the 20th century. 40% of the world economy. China, it started working hard in the early 2000s, while India, don't look at it recently, it's just a thin strip. But let's go back, before the 18th century, how big is India's economy? Basic and China each account for 1/3 of the global economy. Then why do you say it didn't work later? On the one hand, it was indeed the Industrial Revolution in Europe, let the entire productivity of the West rise exponentially, but what is more deadly for India is, the British came to his door. We've all heard about the 2 big East India Companies, Dutch East India Company and British East India Company. Earlier, the Netherlands is actually better. Don't think it's also called the East India Company, but it actually covers East and Southeast Asia, good for India. But then the British East India Company, but slowly from trade, turned into British colonization of India. The Industrial Revolution in full swing in Britain. But like what? Spices, raw materials, textiles, straight from India, made it to India. Always agriculture and textiles, like what kind of industrial technology here? No development at all. Look at the GDP per capita during this period. The UK can be said to be jumping up and down, and India has been lying there without getting up. After we, the British, are gone and India is finally independent. But if you look at its GDP, it has grown from 25% of the global, down to 2. It can be said that the 200 years of colonial rule, indeed, the current Indian economy had a very profound impact. After the British finally left, the Indians looked at it and said that they finally left. You said I was riding on the neck. Suppressed for more than 200 years, I can be regarded as a teacher. What is British-style free trade? This time I have to protect myself. Strict control. Like what industry? Banking. It's all government-controlled. Economically, it is also basically fully accepted. The planned economy model of the former Soviet Union hardly accepts any outside investment, and they also derived a license system, license Raj. Note that this system is critical. Simply put, most companies don't care what you want to do. You have to go to the government to apply for a permit. If you want to do business, then you first have to find 70 or 80 departments of the government, various filings and approvals, spend a lot of energy to open up various relationships. It is possible to obtain this license, and once you get this license, that's like going into a safe. Then you'll be happy. The result is, although India's economy is also developing, but very slow, by 1991 year, a major turning point for the Indian economy, it's coming. I was walking in the mud. At this time, reality hit it again. Its largest client in foreign trade, the Soviet Union, collapsed. At the same time, the Gulf War broke out. Oil prices also soared. On the one hand, the big customers are gone, and the things can't be sold. No money. The other side, the price of energy imports is much more expensive. This makes the Indian government's cash flow very nervous, even faced the risk of national debt default. Finally forced the Indian government, had to reach out to the IMF, borrowed $1.8 billion in loans. I have passed this hurdle. But who is the IMF? It is impossible to give you a loan casually. Then the loan must be conditional. I can lend you money, according to the Western Washington consensus. Come give me economic liberalization. In this way, India is half pushed, half left. Carried out very comprehensive economic reforms. What lower tariffs, interest rates, trade liberalization, open to foreign investment, etc., although it does not open particularly thoroughly, but finally move towards a market economy. India's development is really on the fast track, 1995 year to 2018 year. The average annual growth rate of India's exports exceeds 13%, the third in the world after China and Vietnam. Overall GDP, at an average annual rate of 5.5, increased steadily, reached fifth in the world, but I'm here to chime in. India's economic data, it most likely has some moisture. Many international people have questioned the accuracy of the data, but there's nothing we can do. You can only watch this, so everyone has a number in mind, and in the midst of India's rise, there is an industry that plays a vital role. It's actually very Indian, outsourcing. It can be said that India is the king of outsourcing, accounted for more than half of the world's outsourcing business. Nearly all of the big tech companies in the US, what Google, Amazon, Adobe, Intel, Apple, IBM, all would take part of their business outsourced to India. Let's take the ones Zhao Lin is more familiar with, Wall Street Investment Bank. As far as I know, most of the investment banks will be more or less outsource part of IT business to India. Any basic, technical support software development, then there is no way. You have to communicate with India. Just say I often have to talk to India, an old man called. It's really strenuous, but the hearing of this Indian accent, I have to say that was awesome. Then you say these big companies, why do people choose to outsource to India? I think the three main reasons here are, first of all, the most direct one is cheap, low labor cost. Just say what I just said about the old man in India. He manages a dozen people under his command. He's a very experienced engineer. So I inquired, his salary is just over $10,000 a year. Do you dare to think of putting such a position in the United States? The minimum wage in New York is $30,000 a year. If you were the boss, how would you choose? Not only these traditional big factories, just like the recent popular OpenAI. Does it not train ChatGPT? It needs manual feedback. That requires a lot of manpower. They went to India. Go to my brother and give them feedback. Only pay for 1 hour. Less than $2 paid. But you said that there are many countries with low prices. Why doesn't it include Laos? This brings us to India's second biggest advantage. That is, it has a large number of information technology talents. Indian, he doesn't know why. Special emphasis on science and engineering education. Many parents feel it is the most important goal of raising children, that is to train him to be a science and engineering talent or a programming talent. So in the Indian education system, the strength of this science and engineering department is very strong. Let's not talk, just look at the world now. How many CEOs of top companies have become Indians? CEO of Google, CEO of Microsoft, Adobe, and the Twitter CEO who was just killed by Musk. These are Indians, and they are not only Indians, all after finishing university in India, just went to America. You have to look at the tech startups in Silicon Valley, and about a quarter are Indians. It can be seen that his education in science and engineering still pretty good, and this last advantage of India thanks to the British colonization. That is, he speaks English, so India actually has only that 10% to 20. Well-educated people can speak English, but you think that's close to 300 million people. Take this list out. It can be ranked as the fourth most populous country in the world. So India has almost become the world's call center and technical support center. I was more than once. What shopping site and airline customer service calls over the phone, all with very strong Indian accents. Then you look at it this way, so many people in India speak good English. With a background in science and engineering, labor is cheaper, undoubtedly becoming a global outsourcing center. Total revenue from outsourcing in 2019 year reached more than $70 billion. There are also statistics that say it is more than $100 billion. Anyway, about this order of magnitude, that's pretty huge, especially for the price level in India. Okay, we just had a blast. How fast is the Indian economy? Look at this, isn't it minutes later, after the United States and China? Have you become the third force in the world? If I analyze it like this, I guess the powder will fall off. Look at how big his economy is. The most intuitive reason is that there are so many others, right? We didn't say it just now. He has actually become the most populous country in the world, and it may continue to rise to 2 billion. There are many people and the total amount of nature is large, but you have to observe that the average, 20 to 1 year, India's per capita GDP is 2 to 50, while the United States is 70, less than 1/30th of the United States. Of course you have to compare him with America. That might be a bit of a bully. Let's compare with China. that might be a bit of a bully compared to China. Let's look at Vietnam. If you talk about comparing with Vietnam, you will also bully him. Then let's compare with the younger brother Bengal next to him. Would have been ahead, but these 2 years have also been exceeded. Not enough. Let's compare with Myanmar nearby. Myanmar can. Look at how fast India is developing. But anyway, India's demographic engine, it is really the envy of most countries. What is the key? His population is not only large, and the structure is very good. Let's compare with China. You will find that there are very few old people. Young people and children are very majestic. The median population of India is 27.6 years old. That is to say, half of them are under the age of 28, compared with the median of China and the United States, about 38 years old. France is 42. South Korea is 43 years old. Japan 48.4 years old. Such a big demographic dividend. What an advantage that must be. But the strange thing is, India not only does not encourage births, and I've been doing Planned Parenthood, it is to encourage everyone to have fewer late births, population that no other country can dream of. Even in India, I'm still disgusted. Why do you say? India's current problems. That's why he has so many people, but no use, he can't generate as many jobs. If so, give birth to one more person. That doesn't mean there is an extra labor force, more productivity. It's just one more mouth, one more burden, because he's out of work and can't find a job. In fact, the 1,000-person laundry in India, this is confirmed from the side. You said the laundry factory changed the washing machine. It doesn't smell good, does it? Even if India lags behind, it should be easy to replace the washing machine, but actually, it's because his manpower cost is too low. Low enough to hire someone to wash by hand. It's cheaper than replacing the washing machine. What does this phenomenon mean in turn? That means these people willing to accept such a low wage to do laundry, they can't find a better job. Let's take a look. What is wrong with India's economy? Why can't create so many jobs? Let's talk slowly and deeply now. The underlying problems of the Indian economy. Zhao Lin concluded that there are probably 3 major problems. The first is the problem of India's economic structure. He didn't actually say, not enough jobs. He still has jobs like laundry. Just saying he doesn't have a lot of high quality or high productivity jobs. You look at an economy, we can simply divide into agriculture, industry, and services. When India was colonized by the British, mainly agricultural, after becoming independent, the government is also thinking, let's vigorously develop the industry. But what is the problem? It is he who put those core industries, hold it all in your own hands to create a monopoly, and that license. In short, there is no market competition and it is relatively failure. Therefore, the industry as a whole is relatively weak. After 1991 year, it's hard to start economic reform. India has become the call center of the world, IT stronghold. The service industry began to develop rapidly. The proportion accounted for 56. That sounds high. Just look at the ratio. Feel like India. Catch up with those developed countries. But he is in the process of developing. He actually jumped. As long as your industry is not well developed, you will engage in the service industry. Then someone said, look at the 2 richest men in India. Adani and Ambani take turns as Asia's richest man. It's all big business. Then you say that India's industry is not very good, but in fact, most of them are actually monopolies, and the relationship with the government is still unclear. This is a sign of underdevelopment, especially this Adani. Wealth grew fastest last year, climbed to the 2nd place in the world. As a result, it was bombed by short sellers again this year, became the fastest faller. Isn't it amazing? Zhao Lin is going to make a single video in the future. Talk about this dude. Speaking of which, the main point I want to say, it's just that India's industry is not doing well. In order to solve the problem of weak manufacturing industry in India, Indian government in 2014 year have a Make in India project, Make in India, through various government subsidies and policy support, trying to make India the new factory of the world. After all, India's labor costs are low. It has attracted a large number of enterprises to set up factories in India. For example, like the automobile industry, General Kier, have invested more than $1 billion. You are more like an electronics company. What about Foxconn, Apple's supplier Pegatron, Huawei, Qualcomm, Samsung, Vivo, Xiaomi, all invest and build factories in India. But for now, although the Indian government has spent so much effort, attract those companies to build factories, but the overall effect is mediocre. Look at this, is India's manufacturing sector as a percentage of GDP. Originally, the Indian government wanted to increase this ratio to 20, but now it's not rising but falling, from 17 to 14. Half a century before India, the license system, it's not just about bringing about industrial weakness. More important, deeper, and harder to solve, is its bureaucracy. It's about corruption. This is also the second biggest problem in India. It's not just about government corruption, it's that the economy as a whole isn't doing so well. Right in India, no matter what kind of child you go to school or see a doctor, you have a project, just do something, you have to do something up and down. If you want to get a driver's license, you have to pay for it. 60 of people do not take the test. I got my driver's license. What rules, system, laws? In fact, many of them are just pretending. You have to deeply understand what is called, just go and get some of this, may be solved, according to Transparency International 2020 year report. You see, there is an organization called Transparency. In the past year, Indians dealing with the government, 39 have bribed. This ratio is the highest in Asia. It is precisely because of these rules and regulations. So if you want to be in India, legal and compliant operating company, it's actually very troublesome. So only 10% of people in India work in a regular company, and the remaining 90, that is, the vast majority of people, that company is not registered. You are not protected by any labor law. Do not pay taxes. You said that in the general economy, if you do a little business, it doesn't matter if you don't register, but in India, it's 90% of the people, all informal economy. That's bad, and it will also give birth to a huge underground economy. Then, in order to crack down on these underground black money, the Indian government, it's also a check on those who evade taxes and evade taxes. I held back a big move. November 8, 2016 year, the Indian government suddenly announced, all over the country, banknotes of 500 and 1,000 Indian rupees will be in a few hours, all void become waste paper. What you need to know about 500 and 1,000 bills, accounted for 86% of daily transactions. It leaves a window of 1 month for everyone. You can take this money to the bank and exchange it for new money, but if this exchange money inside, whoever somehow has a large amount of banknotes, then you have to explain. Then you said that everyone has so many banknotes in their hands. Then don't work. Go to the bank and line up to change money. Bank can't. There will be so many new banknotes coming out at 1:30 to meet the needs of these people. As a result, people across the country queued up. Entire Indian economy suffered serious disruption. What's more unfortunate is that the black money was not caught. The government really succeeded in recycling 99.3% of banknotes. Look, mess around. However, this operation has a side benefit, is that it successfully promotes popularity of electronic payments in India. After all, many people are afraid of the government. When will we do this again? Then I'll scan the QR code with my phone. The third issue affecting India's development, in fact, it is relatively isolated, a social custom belonging to India. That is its caste system. Yes, how can we talk about India without talking about the caste system? In fact, in simple terms, it is in the traditional culture of India. It divides the people of India into 4 categories. Outside of these 4 categories of people, or under these 4 categories of people, he called a pariah. Then each caste has its corresponding profession. For example, Brahmins are primarily priests, Kshatriyas are primarily warriors and rulers, and like the untouchables basically just do, like unclogging the sewers, clearing the streets, etc. Cannot receive education. Between different castes, marriage is not theoretically allowed. This system, it has been in India for thousands of years. During British colonization, even put it directly into the constitution. After all, it's convenient for them to manage, right? You want to be graded. I'll take care of it directly. The Brahmin at the top will save trouble. So after India's independence, abolish the caste system, but in fact, it has been deeply rooted in everyone's mind. Different castes can't even be friends. Like that high-paying job, there are some invisible filters, let alone getting married. Until now, only 5% of marriages in India are intercaste. You can imagine, how influential is this caste system? Of course, we won't talk about religion and culture in depth, but from an economic point of view, you just cut a bunch of people into quarters, then go to manage. This will definitely affect the efficiency. In order to eliminate this deep-rooted cultural influence, just like when schools enroll corporate employees, there will be indicators. It's you low-caste people, what percentage must be achieved, but until now it seems that the difference between different castes, like education levels, the gap between rich and poor, there is still a very obvious difference. I declare, this is my personal opinion. Of course, there are some studies that say the caste system has little effect on India, so you can judge for yourself, okay? The 3 questions we mentioned just now led to India can't provide enough jobs to these rapidly growing populations. which leads to a phenomenon that he is often referred to. It's the gap between the rich and the poor. You just think, his per capita GDP is as low as that, but still has been the richest man in Asia, even rushed to the second place in the world. Just across the street in a city, tall buildings on one side. On the other side is the lowest slum. So how big is the gap between rich and poor? This is estimated to be the global gap between rich and poor, one of the worst countries. Let's be more professional and use data to speak. I looked more carefully, the World Inequality Reports, 2022-year edition. To my surprise, India has a huge gap between rich and poor. For example, the richest 10 owns 65% of the country's wealth, while the bottom 50, but only 5.9% of the country's wealth. You look serious, don't you? But to be honest, other countries compared to India, he's really not that strong. You see, America is worse than India. His top 10 own 70.7% of wealth. Like what Chile, Mexico, South Africa, this is 80. So you have to look at the data alone. The gap between the rich and the poor in India is not to say that it is not big. At least, he doesn't stand out that much. But in fact, if at the same time, people who have lived in both India and say, America, he will feel the gap between rich and poor in India. It is much higher than developed countries such as Europe and the United States. In fact, the main reason is that the people at the bottom of India are really poor. The United Nations puts daily income in. Anyone under 365 classified as poor. India in 2019 year, 45% of the population is poor. That's nearly half, more than 600 million people. So you watch India and America, for example, the proportion of wealth distribution may look similar, but you have to look at the actual standard of living. The gap between rich and poor in India is huge. 5 million people starve to death every year. But then again, as far as India has actually been very fast, change this thing, since 2004 year, 40 of the extremely poor, by 2019 year, this number has dropped to 10, that is to say, successfully helped more than 300 million people out of poverty. So from this point of view, actually, he was quite successful. At least it is developing step by step in a good direction. Come on, let's briefly summarize. After India's economic reforms in 1991 year, one is because he really has a relatively thin foundation, large room for development, also because of his outsourcing business, making India rapidly developing into the 5th largest economy in the world, but also because of India's early licensing system, leading to his backward industrial development and serious corruption, coupled with the influence of the caste system, making India can't create enough jobs to satisfy his ever-increasing population, eventually lead to the crooked India we see now, the rapid development of the overall economy, but the people at the bottom, living in dire straits. It can be said that every family has its own hard to recite scriptures, so it seems, India wants to embark on the road of economic rise and take off. Not so easy.